Hey guys, how are you? And welcome to the last of the video lectures of 2020. Thank God 2020 is almost over. We will be back in 2021. Today I'm talking about American culture in the Gilded Age. Okay, one of the things that did not really exist before this time is anything that we can call American culture. We are a young nation and we didn't have a lot of traditions yet. And industrialization changes this because before this, most people are farmers. And if you're a farmer, you have to work on the farm and you work many hours and you work sun up to sundown and you don't have a chance really to do any activities outside of farming. But with an industrial culture and increased transportation and the ability of people to get places, especially trains and trains within cities, i.e., subways or elevated trains, and the idea that people were starting to work less and less towards the end of the century. Now, a lot of factory workers still worked a lot, but as we were getting to the turn of the century and going into the beginning of the 20th century, workers will be advocating for less hours, and a weekend, which is going to be coming, is going to mean more leisure time. And if people have leisure time, they want to entertain themselves. You guys are more than familiar with that, obviously. So we move on to what are some of the things that happen. All right. First of all is literature. Now, literature is the one thing that would have existed even before the Civil War. James Fenimore Cooper is one of the early great American writers. However, the great American writers come after the Civil War. The greatest of all time, my opinion, Mark Twain. I know some of you have been reading The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Ernest Hemingway says it is the most important book in American history and the best book that has ever been written in American history. But the key here is it focuses on realism, and that is a continuing theme on a lot of the things that you're going to see here in terms of American culture. In other words, the dialect, what was happening, it was real. It wasn't a made-up story. It was how things were. The other theme was naturalism, and Jack London typified this in a great novel called The Call of the Wild. If you don't want to read it, Harrison Ford just made an awesome remake of the movie. It's worth a watch if you haven't seen it. So, art reflects literature, literature reflects art, realism in art. People wanted to see what things were as a fact. All right. Winslow Homer was one of the most famous painters after the Civil War. He was famous for seascapes. You will see his paintings in many museums around the country. Whistler's Mother is perhaps one of the most recognizable paintings in American history, other than American Gothic. And again, it's just a woman, his mother, sitting in a chair, but realism, almost a photograph, which again, photography is around at this time, so you can kind of see the influence. And then the other school of art, other than the Hudson River Valley School of Art, is the Ashcan School of Art. It's the only other major art school in American history, and it's just urban settings, urban scenes, urban street scenes, urban social scenes, kind of the tough, gritty, new urban American life. Again, realism in art. Architecture is going to follow the same thing. Naturalism, perhaps the most famous architect after the Civil War is Frank Lloyd Wright. This is Falling Water, but you don't have to go outside the great state of Illinois to find many examples of Frank Lloyd Wright architecture, as he was well known around the Oak Brook area, and he built many buildings in the Chicagoland area. He was actually a student of John L. Sullivan, Louis Sullivan, and Louis Sullivan is perhaps the most famous architectural saying, form follows function. In other words, the form of a building should follow what its function is. This led directly to the first skyscraper, and skyscrapers will become the most common American building. When you see a skyscraper, you think American, even when you see them in other countries. So, leisure time. People want to have fun. All right. People now have time on their hands. They might be only working a 10-hour day, a 12-hour day. Their evenings are free. People are starting to get Sundays off. Eventually, beginning of the century, they'll start getting the weekend, and they want to be entertained. Now, the biggest entertainment still, according to the numbers, was going down to your local pub and hanging out at your local pub. This was mainly a male activity, but it was still the most popular one. However, shows become incredibly popular. Remember, there is nothing like you have today. There's no TV, there's no radio, there's no Netflix, there's no streaming, etc. So vaudeville was huge. Vaudeville put on huge shows. People couldn't wait for Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus to come to town again. This is the impact of transportation, the train. When you can have a train travel around the country, you can have a traveling circus. And along with that goes the Buffalo Bill Wild West show, which had, among other things, the famous sharpshooter Annie Oakley and Sitting Bull, the actual Sitting Bull. He was one of the few Native Americans after the Native Americans were defeated who actually went to the East Coast and saw what the country actually looked like and why the natives never had a chance against the United States government. And then finally, this is the rise of sports in America. Sports is probably one of the biggest impactful things in the United States today. However, two of the sports are not what you, or one of the sports is not what you would have expected. Boxing was the biggest spectator sport at this time. John L. Sullivan, in his famous match where he went 94 rounds. That's right. They did not have a limit back then. And won in a knockout. They went until somebody was knocked out, and it took 94 rounds. Baseball is becoming part of the American way. Baseball, apple pie. You get the idea. And football, although at this time football, unlike baseball, was not a professional sport, it was a college sport. All of these were a subculture, again, of urban young males. It takes a while before these sports, especially boxing, becomes more of a middle class leisure time activity. But just to show you the importance of it, in 1909, William Taft, as you can see there in the bottom corner, threw out the first pitch at a baseball game, and that tradition of presidents throwing out the first pitch has continued since William Taft. Every president has thrown out a first pitch at a baseball game. And then finally, one of my absolute favorites that you'll never guess, and it's always fun to go back in history to look at these, and that is something that some of you have probably never played. If you did, you probably played it when you were young, and that would be croquet. And croquet was not just a national or a leisure time activity, it was a national pastime, and it was part of the dating culture back then. So when I first started teaching, the dating culture included like hanging out at the mall or going and meeting your friends. Today, much of the dating culture is online, and I'll be honest, I don't understand it, but you guys probably do more than I. But back then, if you wanted to court that special somebody, you had a group of friends get together for a game of croquet. As you can see, it was on one of the major magazines of the time. And I love this book, Won't You Come Over and Play Croquet? Clearly, croquet meant more than just croquet there. So just kind of an interesting thing to look back and see where American culture was at this time and where it's come. Thanks for listening, guys. Bye.